Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Kenning, and I am the Managing Director of Aquent in Australia. And on behalf of the whole Aquent team, welcome to DigiTalks. We've got a few people who are still joining us. I think Zoom kind of lets a number of people in at a time, but whilst we're waiting for people to join, and in the interest of timing, I will kind of kick us off. Now, we have enabled closed captions for this webinar, which you can access at the bottom of the screen if you wish. But I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. Aquent acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders both past and present. Now, this is our final DigiTalks of the year, and from the number of registrations we have had, it promises to be our biggest. So whether this is your first time at one of our events, or if you are coming back for more, then thank you all for joining and making it such a success. So today's topic is how to scale digital accessibility and cater for diverse audiences. And our speaker is Ben Pintos-Oliver, the General Manager of Digital Systems and Accessibility at Telstra. Now, Ben is an experienced leader in digital with over 20 years experience leading product innovation and commercial teams for major organizations, including the Boston Consulting Group and CBA, both in Australia and in the UK. His passion for creating great digital experiences for everyone has led him to create one of Australia's largest accessibility teams at Telstra, with a belief that it is our responsibility to create accessible experiences and not for those with a disability to find a workaround. Ben is going to leave some time for questions at the end, so please type your questions in the Q&A tab, which I think you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. But without further ado, Ben, it is over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so hoping everyone can hear me okay and see me well and can see the presentation. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining and obviously taking the time to come in and listen to the talk on how to scale digital accessibility and cater for diverse audiences. My name is Ben Pintos-Oliver. As mentioned, I work for Telstra and I run one of the accessibility teams here, as well as looking across many digital assets. Firstly, I'd just like to say a big thank you and a shout out to Alex, Caroline and the Aquent team for setting up the platform and running the DigiTalks events. And of course, to everyone here on the call for taking interest in the topic of accessibility. In this talk, my aim is to hopefully bust a few myths and help us build up our disability confidence muscles in the hope you will be able to walk away from today to make a more inclusive future for all. As Alex had mentioned, we've got closed caption feature turned on, which you can see down in the bottom menu. Turning that on will mean that you can see the words that are being spoken out and have a little bit of fun to make sure that the AI that sits behind it gets it all correct. There's also a full transcript feature, which recognizes who is speaking. And obviously the words that are being said come up on a side panel as well. Lastly, I will attempt to audio describe everything that's on the screen in case there are any images. And so hopefully I remember to do that on every slide. Okay, let's jump into it. So is it better to do a little bit more than what we are doing right now? Or is there some level that we should all aim for when it comes to accessibility? This is a question that is daily placed before me and others. And while of course it is great to always do better, there is a minimal level that is required for something to be usable. And I'm not talking about good or engaging or easy to use, just usable. So I want everyone listening to this talk to ask yourself the question, where do I draw the line for the minimal level when creating products or services, digital experiences, or even a PowerPoint slide for a presentation? And so Caroline's just going to pull up a poll here up onto the screen. And I just want you to take a look at this scale and ask yourself, where do you sit right now? It's a 1 to sort of 5 option here. 1 being, I don't know, I've never really considered it, which is totally fine. Through to 5 being, I practice best practice, considering the WCAG international standards, and I go well beyond that particular space. So just have a look at that. Just pause for a second. Ask yourself as an individual, where do I draw that line? Where do I usually sit? And so we're going to do that now here, and just take a few seconds to do that. We're going to also come back to this at the end of the talk as well. So I think we're just going to hold that up on screen. I'm going to move forward just while you're answering those questions, or that question. And so the best place to start is obviously around what is accessibility. In terms of a go-to response, what you see up on the page here is that go-to response that a lot of people will usually sort of describe. So I'm going to kind of do this version, and then I might put some extra flavors into it as well. So accessibility is about making things accessible to all people, whether they have a disability or not, as we see this as a very basic human right. It's about designing things for people, whether they're hardware, software, language, location, or ability, preferences are either A, B, or C. And so when we meet this goal, it is about meeting those needs of people with hearing, movement, sight, and cognitive abilities. And it's really about removing those barriers for communication and interaction, empowering social participation. And a really important word here is about independence, giving people their independence back to be able to do things themselves and not to rely on others. So when I give this as actual examples, it's someone being able to read the content on a web page when they can't see the page. It's someone being able to read your terms and conditions when they can't understand the language that's up on the screen. It's someone being able to hear what is being said on your video when they can't hear anything. Or it's someone being able to enter a shop in their wheelchair without having to turn around because of a 4-inch step in front of them. And so a lot of people ask me, okay, well, what's your version of this? And again, up on screen, this is my go-to, and I believe that technology should be available to everyone. And it is our responsibility as the creators of these experiences to make it accessible, not for those with disability to have to find a workaround, which usually seems to be the case. And so when I'm active in this space, I don't feel like I'm necessarily working. And there's a visual up on screen, says work like you don't need the money, in some beautiful hand crafted typography. And this sits up on my wall and is a reminder on a daily basis to really work on the things that are meaningful to me. And I always think back to sort of history similar to the early Persian Empire and that era where star mappers and foreigners and lamissaries traveled the world, and they all congregated together to discuss their ideas and their findings. And it was such an influential period, considered the golden age of science. And if you look closely, you can still see signs of it today in some of those Arabic language words that are being used right now, such as algebra, alchemy, alcohol, algorithms. And so we've kind of got an opportunity right now to start congregating together to solve for accessibility. Our world is so complex, and our digital ecosystems are forever getting bigger and bigger. And so we really need to start to bind together to look at how we solve this as a collective. So to kick us off, a few facts to get us started, and it's quite funny, these stats, they actually change quite regularly. They obviously are they're becoming a lot bigger, and the reason that they're changing so fast is our understanding of disabilities through science and through government are starting to increase quite significantly as we lean towards more egalitarian ways of living. So straight off the bat, 1 in 5 Australians have some form of disability that we know of. This is 4 million citizens within Australia. We also know that once you hit 65, you have a 50% chance of forming some type of disability. We also know that the Australian population is aging 20% over 65 by 2030. So these numbers are going to increase significantly, and these demographics are going to be quite digitally savvy as well. And we recognize that a very, very small percentage of companies are servicing this audience. So if you jump on board this, it is a competitive advantage. There's obviously positive reputation for doing good, having good ethics, and brand benefits obviously come with that. We've got the legal side and the financial and reputational risk that comes with that as well. But ultimately, you know, it's about enhancing that usability and looking for that improved customer satisfaction, those net promoter scores or episodic NPS scores, being able to really start to turn those into higher positive numbers. But I think when we look at we push away the sort of the business and the legal side, and we look at the human side, we really look at what happens when you get this wrong. And for these people with these different types of experiences and the way that they interact, it's about a high impact to their mental well-being. It is the removal of their independence and this sensation of exclusion from society. However, when we get this right, it's about having an amazing, loyal customer and a huge advocate for your brand. And we've got some stats here where, you know, if you're getting it wrong, they're going to be 3 times more likely to avoid your organization. And they're going to dissuade others twice as likely if there is a negative experience as well. And so there's some really powerful stats. And I think for Telstra specifically, you know, we've got a lot of customers that are over 55. So we have a very good reason to be wanting to play within this space and try and do as much as we can to service those customers. And so we talk about quite a lot with accessibility, the reference and connection back to disabilities, but we know it reaches far beyond this as well. And a great example I like to use is, you know, when we increase a color contrast of text against a background screen to help low vision users. This also helps when, for example, looking at a mobile screen in bright sunlight. And you don't have to have a disability to experience that, but these are the user sort of UI-based changes that can make such a significant difference. And you'll see on the image on the right here of a very old advert for an electric toothbrush. And so the story here is, you know, over 50 years ago in 1954, the electric toothbrush was first created by Dr. Felipe. The original intention for the electronic toothbrush was to be used by patients with limited motor skills. But in an era of modern advances where improving lifestyles, there was a place for this electric toothbrush. And even though it had a live voltage from a standard wall outlet. So fast forward to today, and you've got a $3 billion US market that now services the majority of the population in the world. So a lot of people say, well, okay, well, where does accessibility start? How much is it going to cost me? What do I need to do to bring it in? And I think a really interesting place to start is to consider this Forrester's research, which states that the later that you introduce accessibility into your product lifecycle, the higher the cost to go back and fix it. So let's say you launch a new app or site without considering accessibility, and it costs you $1 million to go and create. It could cost you $30 million to go back and fix that. And this is because your solution and the technology choices you made very early on may be very hard to unravel and fix and make it more accessible. And so when we look at, if you introduce accessibility during, say, a design and architectural phase at the very start, there is no extra effort because you're baking it in from the very start. But as you start to go through each phase, it jumps to 5 times the effort, 10 times the effort, 15 times the effort, and sometimes up to 30 if you've already released it out into market. And there's a great landmark case here, which was Maguire versus the Sydney Olympic Games in 2000, that showcased the consequences of not making your website accessible. The resolution cost an estimated $2.2 million and was estimated again to sort of take 368 days to fix it, which obviously the organization claimed was too much effort to go and complete. And the Inquiry Commissioner for the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities ruled the changes to be made and was quoted saying, "I'm comfortably satisfied that the plaintiff, limited access to the website caused him considerable feelings of hurt, humiliation, and rejection. One cannot overstate the consequential effect upon him having to cope, the persistent need to counter what he saw as a negative, unhelpful, and dismissive attitude on part by the organization, charged with the presentation of the most notable sporting event in the history of this country." So that really strongly talks to this idea that if we don't take stock of this at the very start, it's going to be complicated to go back and fix it. So where are these different levels? We talked about the product life cycle, but there are also what we call this idea of a layer cake. And unfortunately, when we talk about accessibility, it's usually about an audit that is run either after the fact, or your accessibility specialists might be making checks towards just before the release date. And so instead we say, okay, well, let's push it left. Let's think about a model that shows very specific stages at which accessibility activates and can also be considered as a potential defect. So at layer 1, this refers to the creation of a pattern, say, for example, a button, and you can bake in the accessibility needs into it at that level. Layer 2, your designer might be picking up that pattern and putting it onto a page, and therefore it needs to consider the flow and the hierarchy of content that sits around that. And there are considerations for the success criteria that relate to that. The third layer refers to the content and publishing aspects of the page. As an example, a content writer will come into that button and write what specifically must be written in that call to action to prompt the user. And layer 4 is about the real world feedback from customers, extracting that verbatim and working out how much you iterate that page. And so we use this model to reduce confusion, reduce the number of people storming up to you, asking you why is there an accessibility defect when our designer and developer had already made it accessible? And you can turn around and say, well, that was layer 2. When your legal team changed the text within that button and they changed it to something like click here, we understand that the success criteria states you must have a descriptive label, and click here doesn't meet that requirement. So the idea is start integrating accessibility activities throughout your product lifecycle. Get your teams to understand these different layers of where accessibility can be considered, and that will start to get you on your way. And so also, there's a number of different things before starting a project or during your project that you consider as well. And these critical moments where you weave in these activities and provide guidance are really critical. And the more you do, the easier it's going to become. There's a little bit of effort to begin with, but once you have it working and streamlined, it will be business as usual. So we break this into two parts, during sprint and global activities. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of these here. One of the very early stages is working with your technical architects to sort of consider engineering decisions. Things like reflow and orientation, which is when users are zooming in or changing from portrait to landscape. This is about making the right decisions early up so that this will be achievable during your build. The other one is working with your UX designers to develop personas that represent people with disabilities. Role play the jobs to be done while in the shoes of these personas, so you can develop empathy with these groups as well. Most people avoid testing at the design phase because it only covers a very small percentage of the accessibility blueprint, footprint, I should say. However, the decisions made early by the designers will eventually be handed over to developers to go and build. And so you may be able to spot defects early on in your flat designs or in your prototypes, which will save a tremendous amount of time building something that is not accessible and obviously having to rework it. Spot checks. This is the classic phase of spot testing working code in staging before releasing. And it's about ensuring that your developers are handing over that code early so that your specialists can go in and check this. Last thing we want is unnecessary pressure, everyone scrambling at the last second to uplift any of these defects. And the last one is I raise with caution, which is the automation tools, because when used appropriately, they can heavily reduce the number of defects from developers if they're using this within their sprint to test their own code. However, many people use an automation tool as the only part of their accessibility program. Not realizing that it only covers 20 to 30% of all the success criteria that needs to be considered. And obviously, depending on the tool, can send out a lot of false positives as well. So definitely proceed with caution. In terms of global considerations, working with your procurement teams to mandate accessibility. We never build everything ourselves. We work with vendors providing white label products or APIs. So get this in early. No point finding out about it a week before, and both the vendor and yourself are sitting there trying to work out what to do. Another piece is around policies. All of your teams will be requesting evidence that you need to go and do accessibility, as it's one of many things that needs to be considered during the product lifecycle. So having action plans, disability and accessibility policies, action plans, governance and ICT documents, all of these things will help with the understanding of escalations, deferrals, tracking of compliance, and things of that nature. And then I'm going to skip over definition of done. User testing with people with disability. This is an amazing activity and usually comes later within the maturity of your accessibility program, but definitely not something to be skipped over. And it is through this user testing that we find the most interesting facts that we see with our customers around the engagement with these products and services, especially with using assistive technology and seeing how they use it to engage. And then lastly is your design system. So this is probably your best accelerator for putting ready-made components into the hands of designers and developers. And it will significantly reduce time from your accessibility auditors in the notion that they know that these components are already accessible. So we're going to just jump into that now and do a little bit of deep dive on the design system. So really quickly, our human brains love to create shortcuts. There are 1,000 data points that are coming into our brains at any one time. And so our subconscious finds ways to recognize those repeatable patterns, both in terms of walking around within the world, but also in terms of digital experiences as well. But when those patterns change due to some kind of form of inconsistency, it causes us to slow down, increasing our cognitive load. And like a button changing color or something changing from being left aligned to right aligned on a page, it's quite noticeable and it's not quite right. However, we struggle to articulate it because it's not normally covered by, it is normally covered by our subconscious. So when sites are inconsistent, but both in either function or user interface, we call that death by 1,000 paper cuts. You don't realize it at first, but eventually it becomes unbearable. But when we get it right, it's unnoticeable. It just flows, there's no friction. So that design system is about identifying those common patterns and making them reusable, both in code and design, so that they're ready for designers and developers to start using across any asset, any platform, and using any language. Think of it like building a car. If you had all the parts ready to go, then it will take less time. And if you have a few different people trying to make that same car, then the chances are not all the cars are going to look the same either, even with the best intent. There's simply too many parts, and with each part containing so many specifications, it would be close to impossible. As seen with the example on screen, this tiny little screw that you can see on the left-hand side is what we call the M520 countersunk hexagon screw. It's one tiny screw in that sea of parts, which is a visual of a dismantled car with all the parts beautifully presented out. And recognizing the detail that goes into such a simple screw with the size and shape and weight and the function of it, you can imagine if you then zoom out and see that same amount of detail for every single part, it would be close to impossible to remember and recognize and do something with it. And so this can also be applied to all front-end patterns like buttons and fonts and icons and form fields that designers would use, in their Sketch and Figma programs or developers in their code buckets. Each component is meticulously crafted to meet the best design and code practices, to be on brand, to match native experiences, and of course, be accessible to the highest standard, all of which takes significant time that a standard mission team would never have the time to go and consider. As noted with the screw, something as simple as this action button on screen here, which shows one of our app screens and the sign in now call to action button. This has over 80 attributes that is associated with that one button, from line width to line color to background color to the text font, understanding the scaling logic, the micro interactions, the accessibility voiceover specs. Is there an icon? Is it center aligned? There's a lot of information there. And each button has 5 different states as well. You throw in dark mode, And all of a sudden we've got 160 attributes for just that one tiny simple button. And you can't expect a designer or a developer to remember all of this, and nor should they. Their time is so much better spent solving other harder problems. All they should have to remember is the name of that button, the action button, medium emphasis. They can pull that off the shelf and put that into what they're working on. And so when you think about, well, how does that really affect accessibility? Well, if we look at these buttons now with all its working parts, it's ready to be used by designers and developers. All states are complete. You have a way to easily convert to dark mode. You've got all your micro interactions that are ready to go. It's defect free. And you now have accessibility compliance with, in this case, 12 of the success criteria already considered. So when used alongside all other patterns, you can expect a material change. In this case, with accessibility, we're looking at the use of color, label in the name, contrast, text spacing. Is the focus order correct? Is the target size correct? Can it be used by a keyboard and recognized? Does it resize appropriately? And does it have the right name, role, and value associated with it? And when we get these things right, it means your accessibility specialist doesn't need to go and check that later when it's actually being used on your screen. This efficiency gain, both from your developers, your designers, and your accessibility specialists, can lead up to a 40% increase in speed to market for all front-end teams. A material financial number once you add it all up. And so future-proofing as well is another consideration. If you design your design, if you set up your design system in a way that allows instant updates both to your designers and developers and then the production code, you can make changes on the fly, which will automatically be synced up as well. So, like Edmund Halley, with his passion for truth and exploration, mapping the stars through expeditions so that merchants and explorers could navigate by stars visible anywhere on Earth. With our Able Telstra design system, we're collectively mapping the most cohesive and accessible design system so both our customers and our practitioners can best navigate our products and experiences. And this is the coming together of two of the teams that I look after here at Telstra. So even with all the best parts, doing something new can be hard. People don't generally like change. And so we've seen all types of reactions from people when we ask them to do something. And we've recognized that everyone is very busy when they're working on new products. Lots of things to do, lots of things to consider. And so asking them to say, can you do these extra activities without giving them the context? This was a big concern for us because people kind of sat there and questioned, why must I do this? Why do I have to do all of these considerations? And we've taken many different approaches to try and motivate people to do this, to change it from being a checklist type activity. And we've tried egalitarian approaches whereby we say it's our ethical responsibility to do the right thing as humans, ensuring that all people deserve equal rights and opportunities. Or we might take the carrot approach whereby we say, come sit in one of our user testing sessions with a person with disability. Trust us, you will feel good afterwards. We might take the stick approach. You don't want to be one of those people responsible for a regulatory fine of millions of dollars, customer court cases, legal fees, reputational risk, negative customer sentiment, greater regulatory and media scrutiny. Or we might take the business approach. You want to increase your audience by a potential 20%, all of which will be loyal customers advocating for your brand and product. No matter the approach, we found that there was always a difference. There was always something that was missing. And that was when we actually showed the disability through simulation, the person could sit there and get just a little taste of what it is like to step into the shoes of somebody with a disability, even if it was for a second. We called it our aha moment, that sudden realization of what a truly poor experience was when others have it sorted. And it made sense. Most of us simply can't simulate the experience because we don't have the disability. So building empathy was key. This is what we wanted to concentrate on. Having the other approaches came in second in terms of motivation. And so I'm just going to show a very quick example. Up on screen right now, you can see the Telstra home page from a couple of days ago. And I'm going to show you, what does this look like with someone with glaucoma, which is a visual impairment whereby the optic nerve is damaged, causing a loss of peripheral vision or tunnel vision. And so this simulation, which obviously has shown the rest of the screen go black, and there seems to be a bit of a halo effect based on the focal area, and only where that person is looking shines a light onto that particular area. Now, this is one example of it. There are many different variations of how that visual impairment shows. But as you can see here, they can't see everything, and their vision might be slightly blurred. So making sure that you have the right size text, high contrast colors, and these are going to be very critical visual examples of how to bring that to life. So further to this, we need people to move past the title on the book and build a deeper understanding for disability. We need to move beyond the iconic or cliche symbols and get to better understand disability. And I think one thing to really call out is disability can be permanent, which is our kind of known area. It can also be temporary, and it also can be situational. And it applies to touch, sight, auditory, speech, and cognition as well. And with this in mind, it helps us to understand that all of us at some point in our lives will fall into one of these categories. The example I like to use relates to auditory scenarios. You might be born deaf or become deaf. You might also get an ear infection, which might last you a few days or weeks. You might be a bartender working in an Irish pub where you can't even hear your own voice, let alone the person across the bar. So once you have an understanding of these personas, get to know how they manage their impairment. As someone who is blind, do they use assistive technology to read out what is on the screen? As someone who is hard of hearing, do they use captions or transcripts to communicate on Teams? Or someone with dyslexia, do they prefer sentence casing to increase the chance of recognizing characters? This is where you need a lot of support from the rest of the business.
And Ben, one of the things, it's Alex. Sorry, just drop out. Just your 10-minute warning, just on time, please.
Thank you, Alex.
10-minute warning. Go.
Perfect. Thank you. So in terms of that support, look to other parts of the business. Where I sit in digital, we've got the technical expertise, but we cannot do what we're doing without the support of our corporate relations teams, our HR teams, and our risk teams. So really start to build a relationship with them, find connections and ways to work on policies together, and really have a collective voice, as it's a lot harder to say no to many people rather than one person. And once you have this buy-in, how do you measure engagement? And how do you consider this for all of your product roles as well? Whether it's upskilling and accessibility, becoming a champion, being proactive, so that, for example, your designers talk about accessibility in their next design critique ceremony. Well, we know that the 50 WCAG standards or success criteria can be mapped to each discipline. And by applying a racing model over the top and taking a survey, you can capture the team's skill level, providing a baseline. The example that you see on screen shows a heat map of scores from 1 to 5, 5 being high, 1 being low. And this is a really interesting view that helps you understand the strengths and the gaps each chapter or team has. Setting goals on where you want the team's competency level to get to will also help drive motivation. And the survey can help understand that competency level from unskilled to high proficiency. Don't worry if you see a lot of red initially. It will look that much better once you uplift all the team members. And so the example on screen shows a histogram with data showing competency, and it's mapped against some of the major success criteria. Those noted as unskilled or learning are indicated on the left-hand side in the red and the orange here, while those that are positively competent are shown on the right with the accumulative score given as a percentage. So as an example, the text alternative there in terms of just competency for that is sitting at 48% there for that particular group. And it gives you this nice indication of where the confidence levels are with those teams. Once you have your percentage data mapped out, apply the RACI model to indicate which success criteria was relevant to the role. In this example, so if you take the principle of perceivable here in this table, look at the time-based media, which is the second item in guideline, and you apply the RACI model, I equals informed. So it's not critical for this role to understand it. So it only has a target of 25% of the group needing to have some kind of competency in it. The team is tracking at +2% to target, which is great. If we drop down one more to the adaptable piece here, R equals responsible. So this is very critical for the role. So they have a target of 75%, but unfortunately they're tracking below the target at 57%, which is 18% off target. So acknowledging the variant targets shines a light on these gaps and allows you to put focused training, brown bags and other activities to close the gap. Lastly is these people are going to be hungry to learn. Create some form of single source of truth for them to align information directly to their specific practice group. As a visual designer, UX designer, content designer, producer, developer, tester, it's really critical. And the information within this, and this is an example of a tool that we have on our Confluence pages, allows people to drill in and either skim, swim, or dive into information specific to that success criteria around how to test it and play with it as well. Lastly, to finish up, just going to talk about measuring against the WCAG standards. This is an example on screen of something that we would do within project. We, through this, can work out the number of defects that we have within a particular sprint or a release, look at how many have been identified versus fixed, and we can map this data to specific success criteria, understand the criticality of it in terms of level A, AA, AAA, or expert observation, look by team or by release as well. And your third-party company or a vendor can also do this for you. Someone that you trust and is certified. And if successful, provides you with a statement of conformance for the pages audited on that specific date as well. Lastly, how do you wrap this all up and to look at it at the enterprise level? And how do you do this? Well, we've got what's called an accessibility maturity framework. Simply put, you can take one of the assets and say you find 10 defects. You can go and fix 5 of those defects and you're tracking at 50%. And we sort of make it a little bit simpler by putting in banding. So a band 4 would be 0 to 49%, band 3, 50 to 79, band 2, 80 to 89, and band 1 would be 90 to 100. And so for each year, we set a goal, we track that progress to quarter. And in this scenario, asset 1's doing really well. All level A's are being fixed at 100%. Double A's are at 84, so they're green and ready to go. Asset 4, on the other hand, not looking so good on paper, but it might be due to a new team starting starting out, or you're inheriting some kind of legacy asset. Right now, they're tracking at 27% for level A's and 0% for double A's. So they're falling short of that quarter target, and obviously gives you an opportunity to then lean into that and find out how you might fix that particular area. Lastly, share this scorecard with the mission teams, with the POs and the TPOs. A shared scorecard means they're doing the work, not just you asking them to do it as well. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Quite a lot of information to go through there. So potentially, or hopefully you've learned something new, and hopefully it's brought something to your attention that you might be able to go off and do in the future to make things more accessible. So I'm hoping Caroline can bring up the same, or the next poll, which is essentially the same question. And I want all of you to think about, where do you aspire to be? Again, looking at 1 to 5, I don't know, or I don't consider it, through to best practice for 5. Thank you all very much. And I think we're going to be handing over for some Q&A.
Absolutely. Cool. Ben, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I saw a comment actually in the chat that said, such great examples, really clearly explained, and I couldn't agree more with that. That was fantastic. Thank you. And we do have some questions coming in, so I will kind of jump straight into those. One here is from Nikki. How do you get engagement from other teams, as in get them involved and working with you so whole company is on your accessibility journey? What advice do you have for that?
Yeah, great question. Start early with policies. Get business buy-in from your executives, from your COlt. Get your designers and your development chapters in terms of their leaders bought in. Bake in a mandate, determine as a business where you want to aim for, and then ensure that that is then communicated top down to the rest of the teams. Many businesses try to start, or many people have this passion and desire and urge, and they try to go from bottom up. But in the end run, if the PO is sitting there determining what's in or what's out, or you have somebody else playing that role, accessibility is just fighting against another 500 other things. So build your little passion areas, train people up. All of those things are really important. Showcase it to those designers and the developers. They will naturally move towards that. But ultimately, it's your policies, your accessibility action plans. These are the things that are going to drive the most amount of change.
Cool, fantastic. And another question, when you factor in vulnerable customers, diversity in all its forms, disabilities, it paints a relatively large portion of the kind of the population. So where should you start? Which segment or disability should you focus on first?
Yeah, this is a great question, Alex. The international standards, look at sight, auditory, cognitive, neurological, and mobility equally. So when you look at the standards, level A, then AA, then AAA, in terms of A, it is designed to cover all disabilities at the same time. So rather than having to worry about, oh, should I go somebody who might be blind or can't hear, the idea is if you work towards the standards, it will cover it all off for you. And that is the minimum standard that things like the DDA, the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, this states that you must meet AA standards, right? And so the idea is work towards those standards and it will cover all of those things off. Once you get a little bit on your way, you can start going for AAA, which does focus on a specific disability group. And a great example is Microsoft's Xbox. They designed a controller specifically for people that don't have hands. So the controller, rather than having lots of little buttons, had 2 pads that they were able to use and game. And that was really quite interesting and a great example of Microsoft going that step further to really focus on a particular disability group in relation to their product.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, cool. Oh, got some more questions coming in here. What have we got up here? Thanks for the great talk. How do you perform user testing? Is there a pool of users with disability at Telstra to support testing?
Yeah, so user testing, initially what we did is we teamed up with a preferred supplier who already had quite a good database of people with disability. User testing, usually there's a bit of setup in terms of writing your scripts, trying to work out who your audience is that you want to go and test with, what experiments you want to be running with them, and that can take some time. When you're doing this with people with disabilities, you need to double the amount of time and really sit down and consider the type of technology that you're using and what you're actually showing them. Because a flat design is not going to work for somebody who is blind using assistive technology, because they need to be able to read the actual live code. So just stopping, slowing down, and really thinking about how you do this, especially online, is really critical. And I'd advise, if you're not too sure exactly what you're doing, try and team up with a vendor to help you with that. You'll build your confidence slowly, and then you can start doing that on a somewhat regular basis. As an example, with Telstra, we run this monthly. So we pick a different asset, we go for that particular group. Might be search as an example. We bring in a bunch of different types of disabilities, from cognition to mobility to sight to auditory. We bring those people on and we test very, very specific things with them, but we only test a couple of things because the experience is just a little bit slower than what somebody would normally be used to.
Sure. Great, thank you. I did have a question here, I lost it. Oh, there we go. It's from Liam. Love the inclusive design matrix slide. Will be great for encouraging buy-in. For the 1 in 5 Australians have some form of disability statistic, does that include people with a situational disability?
No. So this is 1 in 5 only talks to people that have proactively called out the fact that they have a disability. Right. We believe that number is higher, noting that everyone is an individual, and people either resonate well or not so well with their disability. Some people hide it, some people are proud of it. We have all sorts of different situations there. And so there will be active people who are, active in terms of trying to hide their disability. And so they will never put their name down, either as an employee or on some kind of government form, that they have a disability, because they don't believe it's actually a disability. It's just the way that they are.
Gotcha. Right. And I'm not sure who this is from, it's an anonymous person, but is there a different approach for mobile app versus web for accessibility compliance?
So the WCAG standards are applicable to both web and native. To be very fair, the WCAG standards, when they were created as 2.1, the language that's used in there does say the word web quite a lot. I'm really hoping in 2.2 that should be coming through very soon. I think early next year or mid next year. I'm hoping they change that language to just digital. In terms of majority of the success criteria, so there's 30 for level A, another 20 for double A, so 50 in total. They can all be applied, majority of those can be applied to native and web. Sometimes in native though, there's some little nuances when you're thinking about iOS or Android. And then the other thing that you need to consider in native that you wouldn't in web is talkback and voiceover as well. So voiceover is the assistive technology that reads back what's on the page, and talkback is the Android version as well. So when you're going through and testing on a mobile device, make sure you turn that on and listen to, tap, swipe, because that's going to be reading out what's on the phone. Sorry, I tilt my head because that's how you you don't try not to look at the screen. You're just tapping, moving like that to try and get the experience, and listening to, is it picking up the role label on the button? Is it actually going where you want it to go? And that's really, really critical. There's some other little more complex features like Rotator, which if you get a couple of fingers and rotate them like this, it allows a user to skim through headings. And so there's those types of things that you want to try and do as well.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for a couple more questions, and we've got 2 more here, which is really cool. How do you initiate the conversation if your company/team do not believe vulnerable or disability users are their customer or audience group?
I laugh because there's been plenty of conversations in this space, and there just are sometimes some people that go, my version of what disability is might be quite simplified, and so their version of let's say disability equals man in wheelchair, or disability equals lady with guide dog. That's their version of it. And they go, why would, let's say a gaming product, why would anyone with a disability game? They don't game. And I've been in a conversation like that, and I've luckily had quite a lot of data around me that states, that people with disability do this. And even to the point where I think it was, if I can remember it correctly, don't quote me on this, 60% or 50% of Australians game, which I thought was a ridiculously high number. And 20% of that audience group actually has a disability, particularly those with neurological or cognitive impairments, because they love to be able to immerse themselves into these games rather than social experiences. And what we had to do is just very nicely and kindly take a breath, say, okay, well, I think you'll find that actually the audience groups do. And here are some examples of that. And showing them, what are these different disability groups? How does it work? How would they engage with it? And I think that just instantly tilts the conversation. Again, I would say if you have it built into your policy as a mandate, it becomes a null and void conversation anyway, but still take the opportunity to sort of take somebody through that experience and understand, what it is that they might not know of. Yeah.
All right, great, thank you. And we do have one final question, but I'm conscious of time, but it's a really good question. Maybe we could, I know we're going to share the recording and the blog post, and maybe we could put some resources. Annabella said, can we recommend any resources for developing competency tests? Would love to start testing the abilities of the team, I think.
Yeah, so W3C is like the Bible online. It's a little bit hard to digest the information because it's built for industry people. We've taken that and converted it into simple language, I will say, and tried to convert it that way. I know Microsoft as well has some great information on their websites as well in terms of inclusion. That's where I ended up getting that graphic for the permanent, situational, and temporary viewpoints as well. And so I'd be going into places like that and having a little bit of a search around. Let me do some digging around. I'll get some links together and hopefully we can put it in the blog as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so I think that is our time. As mentioned, a recording will be sent out of this for everybody, along with a blog post that will be emailed out to everybody, so do look out for that. Also look out for dates and topics of our DigiTalks throughout 2022. But for now, Ben, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed that. And thank you to everybody for joining and for all of your support. But for now, thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Aquin. Thank you, DigiTalks. Enjoy, everyone. Have a great day.
No problem. Bye-bye.